My name's Anna Smith. I'm one of the Vice Chairs of Voscur Board, and I've been given the pleasure of introducing our three eminent and interesting speakers. Margaret Firth, who is Policy Manager for the Local Intelligence Team, the Office for Civil Society, is going to speak first. Margaret's worked for Voscur and provided policy support to the voluntary community sector, and is also a volunteer at Friends of Christ Church School, which is very relevant to the big society agenda this afternoon. Second speaker is Jan Ormondroyd, who's Chief Executive of Bristol Council, which has the very ambitious agenda of being a prosperous modern European city. And last but not least, Deborah Evans, who is the Chief Executive of 3 NHS, Bristol, North Somerset, South Gloucestershire. As well as that job, Deborah was a member of the Bristol Partnership Executive Board and Chair of Children and Young People's Trust. So first to speak is Margaret Firth.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much to Voscur for inviting me to speak today. I'm very pleased to be here. The Office of the Civil Society provides the strategic home, let's say, for big society across government. I'll talk about that a little bit more in a second. But my aim really today was to present the government's an overview of the government's current policy and legislative developments at the moment, to provide the context to allow further exploration of how voluntary sector organisations can be involved in the delivery of public services, and how they can be involved locally in big society. David Cameron is passionate about big society. He's made it clear that the government's duty is to sort out the budget deficit. And that, obviously, as you'll be aware from the news every day, is key priority. And building economic growth is key to government. But David Cameron's personal mission is social recovery as well as economic recovery. The Prime Minister has emphasised his commitment to the big society and his desire to build a bigger, stronger society. A key element of the government's commitment is making it easier for people to have a say in terms of what happens in their communities and how services are delivered. Before I came here today, some of you may be aware that David Cameron at the moment was speaking to the liaison committee this morning about big society. And he re-emphasised the importance of big society, and in his view this morning, identifying how is big society working. His view was making it easier for people to get things done, making it easier for people to work locally and to come together and solve local problems. Interestingly, last month, the Public Administration Select Committee, Francis Maud, who's the Cabinet Secretary, Nick Hurd, who is the Minister for Civil Society, and Greg Clark, who's the Minister for Decentralisation, appeared. And they were challenged that big society is an undefined concept. And they stressed in their response that it's not necessarily for government to define what big society is. It's down for local people, local communities to define what it is for you. Fundamentally, their view, though, was it's more people being involved in the community, doing more people power. Having said that, I'll give you an overview of strategically what the government does think it is. It is about seeing things differently. The aspiration is that big society re-evaluates the relationship between state, both central and local government, with individual families and communities. It sets the challenge, what should government do, and the flip side of that, what should government not do, and in turn, what should individuals do for themselves with their communities. Big society is more than being about money. It's about a belief that in the past, government has societies looked at government for too much support. This is taken from a letter Nick Hurd, Minister for Civil Society, wrote to the sector last month. And he re-emphasised that a bigger and stronger society will focus on well-being, and the idea that ministers and commissioners should consider the full value and effect of the services they provide. It's about working on the large amount of inspiring work already done by civil society and communities across Britain. So big society is not a new concept. David Cameron said that again this morning. Big society might be a new badge, but it's been going on for thousands of years. Hundreds of years, I think David Cameron said this morning. not thousands. But although it will have been going on for thousands, community work has been around there forever. Okay, so let's have a little look at the new sets of terminology that come along with a big society. Localism and decentralisation are the focus of the Department for Communities and Local Government. These are around stripping away as much regulation and bureaucracy as in the system as possible. The focus on decentralisation is about moving power to individuals and communities and away from central and, to some extent, local government. Big society is the vision where people use the powers and responsibilities granted to them through localism and decentralisation to create better services and outcomes for their communities. So, as I said, big society is the strategic framework. The vision for big society is around putting more power into people's hands. It's a transfer from Whitehall to local communities. There are three kind of core themes: promoting social action, so people having more active part in society. It's around empowering communities, local councils and neighbourhoods being empowered, having more power to take decisions and shape local areas. And it's about opening up public services, a greater diversity of providers, and devolving power to local commissioners. This slide provides a kind of overview of elements of big society activity that the government has instigated in the last 18 months or so. So there's the three core strands that I've referred to and examples of how the government demonstrates those. And then the fourth one in terms of supporting the voluntary and community sector, which crosses across the other three. So, the localism bill. That's the first core strand. Localism and building the big society is about turning government upside down. I've touched on that already. So that individuals, groups and neighbourhoods are in the driving seat for their communities, with local government playing an enabling role. We know that it's a difficult period of transition and that cuts are hitting local authorities hard, but big society and the localism agenda is a game changer. At the heart of it is how we deliver public services better for less. So, the overall effects of the localism bill. New freedoms and flexibility for local government. So, greater confidence, so local people and local government are able to get the job done. The potential for an elective mayor in Bristol, which, as Jan has just been telling me, is rather a hot topic. I'm sure that will play out over the coming year. Ability for local councillors to play a more active role. The power of competence for local authorities. Encouraging new leaders to be involved in local government. There are new rights and powers for local communities, so it's easier for local people to take over the amenities they love and make them a real part of local life. Support for local social enterprise, volunteers and community groups to bring life to ideas that they have. Rights such as the community right to challenge, the community right to buy, the potential for local referendums on local issues. There's also reform of the planning system, to put more influence in the hands of local people, the right to draw up neighbourhood development plans, a greater involvement for local neighbourhoods to shape their places. And the fourth strand of the localism bill is providing new powers around housing, community right to build and reforms to social housing. The second major area of government legislation that's finding its way through government is the Open Public Services White Paper. The aspiration is that giving people choice to tailor services for their needs, providing a louder voice, providing fairer access, and people will get better services as a consequence. Greater choice will allow people to shop around and decide where and how they access a service. And I'm sure Deborah will reflect on that from an NHS perspective shortly. But choice doesn't necessarily mean leaving people on their own, and the disadvantaged will get help and fairer access for all. People will have a louder voice to influence public services. Decentralising power and improve accountability will help people and communities have a real say on who, what, where, when and how services they use are delivered. So what are the potential opportunities for the voluntary and community sector? In terms of the role, there's greater provision for being involved in decision-making, being involved for lower levels of government. I know Bristol are keen to explore with DCLG how that reflects in terms of neighbourhoods within Bristol, and the white paper refers to town and parish community councils, and obviously in a unitary area there needs to be consideration of how that plays out to the local level. But the potential for greater involvement in community budgeting and the opportunity for the sector to be directly involved through community budgets to tackle social problems. Extended commissioning, the freedom for local commissioners to involve those who understand local need into the commissioning process, and the exploration of new payment models. So the third core strand is social action. In May, the government published the Giving White Paper, based on the belief that everybody can make a difference. The Giving White Paper has 3 core strands, making it easier to give in terms of both time and in terms of money. Examples, for instance, the rounding the pound scheme and ATM giving. I was looking at the slides again this morning, and I thought I was in Bristol only the other day doing my shopping at lunchtime, and when I came to put my PIN number in, it asked if I wanted to add an extra 21p to donate to a charity to round that up. It's the first example personally I've seen where that's happened. I did donate that 21p, and you know, it's a very simple way of giving. I'm sure if everybody shopped in that shop added a 20p or even a 5p to their shop, the charity that was involved would greatly value. So examples such as that, making it easier to give. Making it easier to give in terms of support and of time through community organisers and business connectors. Making giving as compelling as possible, so looking at pilots around credit for volunteering, looking at the community fund in terms of match funding, and examples such as the National Citizen Service, and then providing better support for those who provide opportunities to give. The infrastructure fund, for instance, funding into voluntary sector infrastructure and simplifying gift aid for charities. I thought it would be helpful for me to touch on a key area of government funding within the social action tranche. The Community First Fund is a new fund that's recently announced through government and has links with the Community Organisers Programme, which you may equally be aware of. In Bristol, the Community Organisers Programme is being hosted by Barton Hill, and 4 community organisers have been recently recruited and will be focusing their work in Ashley, Lawrence Hill, Easton and Southmead. They're very much at the start of their process. They've completed some training and are in listening mode, going out and speaking to members of the community to find out what their interests and issues are. The Community First Fund is part of a national programme which is putting £30 million into the most into targeted neighbourhoods across the country. In Bristol, 9 wards have gained this funding, and it's a new approach to funding projects with the aspiration of levering in time, money and other resources to help communities regenerate their areas. Each area will need to set up a community first panel and develop a community first plan. And both of these provide opportunities in the areas of Bristol for smaller voluntary and community sector organisations to address local priorities, identifying local projects that can gain match funding through this fund. As I said at the beginning, I work for the Office of the Civil Society. We form part of the Cabinet Office. Our role is to provide leadership around big society, provide an overview of what the government sees as big society, communicate that to you, across government be an advocate for the voluntary and community sector. As an office, we're directly involved with partners in the delivery of social action projects, such as the Community First Fund, community organisers, etc. And we work together, hopefully with local communities, to deliver big society. In terms of opportunities for the civil society, government believes that the Big Society agenda contains 3 major opportunities. Nick Hurd wrote to the sector in October and emphasised the government's commitment to the civil society sector as a commitment to open public services that create opportunities for charities and social enterprises. There's an explicit commitment within the coalition agreement to support the creation and expansion of the sector and to have a greater involvement in running public services. There's the opportunity to shape local priorities and an increased emphasis on access to social investment. Within this, the government has 3 objectives in terms of supporting the sector. Making it easier to run a charity or a social enterprise. Government's had red tape task forces and looked at ways of making it easier to run a charity. There's better support to frontline organisations. I touched on it already. The Local Infrastructure Fund will provide funding for infrastructure, and Voscur with partners across Bristol have put in a bid for that fund. Making it easier to work with the state, the new compact, the best value guidance recently from DCLG that gives councils the request to consider overall value in terms of social value when considering service provision, and re-emphasise the desire that public agencies and civil society collaborate in the delivery of public services. And thirdly, putting resources into the sector. Philanthropy and the state have been 2 pillars of funding into the sector. The current government wants to build a 3rd pillar in terms of social investment. The mission is to make it easier for social entrepreneurs to access capital and to give savers more opportunity to invest for good. The aim is that an effective connection between mainstream capital and the social sector does not exist today, and the government wants to build on that. Big Society Capital, some of you may have heard of it previously as the Big Society Bank, will release £400 million from dormant bank accounts, along with £200 million from Merlin banks to catalyse social investment and provide a permanent boost to the civil society. I'm conscious I have quite a short slot, so my next slides I'm not necessarily going to talk about, I just wanted to highlight them to you really. The Big Society Awards have been created to identify individuals, groups and organisations that demonstrate big society through those 3 core themes. Would very much encourage you, if it's something you may be interested, to take a look at the website and consider putting in an application. You can nominate yourself, you can be nominated by others. Community organisations, local authorities, public sector organisations can all be put forward for nomination. Similarly, the Queen's Award for Voluntary Service. Again, I've been asked to highlight this award to you, and next year we'll see the Diamond Jubilee Award. So again, there's a reference there for you if you're interested. And just very simply, a moment on my role. I form part of the local intelligence team. There's 1 post in each region across the country. My role is to connect between local areas and Whitehall. I work with the policy teams in the Office of the Civil Society and try and make the connections down with local areas. My role is to kind of disseminate and talk to people about government policy and then provide intelligence back from local areas back into Whitehall to influence that policy development. The next slide gives some ideas of things I'd be interested to hear about from you. I'm very happy to come out and talk to you about your organisation. If you tell me, be very keen to hear about the work you're involved with, can feed that into ministers. Nick Hurd, the Minister of Civil Society, is always interested to hear about what's going on in the ground and feed those things in. Worth me highlighting, obviously, I'm from the government, so we're very interested to hear about good news stories, innovation, interest, and all those kind of things. But similarly, if there are particularly challenging areas or barriers that you're coming across, I'll be very happy to talk to you about those as well and feed those into Whitehall. And that's me. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Margaret. That was a very useful insight into the government policy, a distillation of the big society and how the voluntary sector might take up opportunities.